I'm Dan, and if you're new to homebrewing, so am I. Welcome to my adventures in homebrewing. Hey everybody, it's that time once more to go around the sun one more time and have a beer or two along the way. This week we are very fortunate to have two guys who are honestly have kept me laughing a lot of the time right now, even just getting caught up. We have Denny Conn and Drew Beechum on the show this week. Boys, thank you very much for being on the show. I need to say thank you to Mandy Naglich, who was on the show last week. Very coolly, we talked about beer glasses and what the beer glasses can do for you, and a little bit about their history and all that. Personally, we were both of us were saying it's to get from point A to point B. So point E being from the table, point B being your mouth and down your throat. So, guys, again, thank you very much. So, I'm a little starstruck because I've seen you guys on YouTube. Yeah, Drew's going, who the hell are you guys talking about?
Yeah.
And okay, you're beer famous. How's that?
Yeah, there you go, man.
Okay,
That's what Randy said.
Okay.
Randy's wife.
That and $5 will get you a latte at Starbucks.
That's right.
Wow, you guys got it cheaper than we do here in Canada. Here it's like 6 or 7. What do you guys got going on down there?
Exchange rate, man.
Oh yeah, exchange rate. Okay, here we go. So I've been watching these guys on YouTube for a little while now, and also been listening to their podcast. And it is amazing what you guys have accomplished and what you guys do with beer. And I'd be interesting to hear a little bit more what you guys can do with beer for experimentation and things like that. But before we dive into that, let's go eeny, meeny, miny. Okay, well, because the first person was on was Denny. So we'll get Denny to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about himself. Then we'll go on to Drew.
Okay.
Oh, you're in the fire now, bud.
I think that's the way it should be with me going first. My name is Denny Conn. I'm an old fart. I've been brewing for 23 years now. And let me see, what's the date today? Today is March 12th when we're recording this. 1 week from today will make 23 years since I brewed my first batch. I just brewed batch number 576. So I've kind of got obsessed with it. I've been on the governing committee of the American Homebrewers Association for 15 years. Before all this stuff hit, Drew and I used to be lucky enough to travel all over the world talking to people about homebrewing. And as far as I know, I'm the only homebrewer who has a strain of brewing yeast named after me. So
really?
Y yeast 1450, Denny's favorite.
Oh, cool.
Well,
I'm gonna have to look for that.
Well, I think that's no longer quite the case now with all the new Kvike strains out there being named after farms and farmers, and
But
you're the
I'm
only American homebrewer.
That's right. There you go. And he's Drew.
Yeah, if you can't tell, we've been around each other for a good long while. We actually sound more like
I'd never know that.
we actually sound more like a married couple than married couples do.
That's right.
You guys sound like I'm back in battalion. What are you guys talking about?
It's really funny. Before we started the podcast, and one of the things that gave us the idea to start it was we were down in Brazil to go to a conference there, and they were going to take us out to see some of the sites. So we were on a bus with like a local homebrew club and stuff getting ready to go, and Drew and I start doing our usual bickering, picking on each other things. And one of the guys turns around and says to one of the other ones, "It's like the books have come to life."
And I want to stress for everybody, we in no way, shape, or form plan out any of this shtick. This is just exactly who we are. So,
yep.
Okay, that works for me. As long as you can take as good as you give, we're good to go.
Oh yeah, man, no problem.
All right.
Yeah, there have only been relatively few tears.
Yeah, that's right.
Tears.
I got over it.
Such a crybaby. Jeez. A little tap with a baseball bat, and he breaks down.
Oh wow! All right. Okay. This is going to be a fun one. This is awesome. All right, Drew, you're up next, brother.
So I'm Drew Beechum, and I'm actually about a week past my 22nd anniversary of being a homebrewer. So been doing it for a while. I do not know I have zero clue how many batches of beer I've made. I am not nearly that meticulous about note taking. I have recipes scattered on little sheets of paper hidden in the garage. I have recipes scattered in different parts around the internet. I have no clue how many batches of beer I've made, but I made a lot.
A lot.
Yeah, a lot. More than any rational human being ever should have. Um,
That's what my wife tells me all the time because I'm constantly brewing almost every other weekend.
mhm. Well, yeah, and so like when I first started homebrewing, I started homebrewing in my two-bedroom apartment in North Hollywood, California, with a little gas stove, and I was brewing 5-gallon batches of beer. And I was working as my day-to-day life is actually as an engineer, although actually nowadays I'm a director, so I'm less useful. And the um, I would come home at like say 6:30, 7 o'clock at night, and I would fire up the stuff on the stove. And like, yeah, I mean, I was brewing every week for at least 2 to 3 years when I first started doing it on my stove from about 6:30 at night to 1 o'clock in the morning. And that would just be how I'd brew.
That's
Didn't have a
dedication.
girl, yeah, didn't have a girlfriend at the time.
That explains a lot. All right.
That does,
That
doesn't it?
explains a lot.
Nowadays, my wife very fortunately kicks me out to the garage. She's like, "Don't you have to make a batch of beer?"
Yeah. So I got back into homebrewing about 2.5 years ago after taking a hiatus called my kids.
Yeah, I can do it, man.
Yeah. So when I was doing it, I was just like the things like Grainfather and RoboBrew hadn't existed yet. So it was always on the stovetop, and you had the plastic carboys or the plastic bucket. But the kit my wife had got me for the holidays didn't have like the lid or an airlock. So over the top one, multiple layers of saran wrap, a few bungee cords. Let's let it do its thing. Then next time you get toddlers going, "What's this?" Poking the fingers through the plastic.
Oh man.
Next thing the dog comes over. Oh, there's a hole. Nose goes in the beer, and then you're like, why is it growing mushrooms? I really don't know what I've done wrong. Then you open it up completely, and you're like, yeah, we're not gonna take a chance with this, and down the drain it goes. And you're like,
Oh man.
and then you're like, I'm taking a break.
Yeah, that could be a bit much. I got into brewing when my son had already grown up and moved away, so I got to bypass all that.
Nice.
Yeah, and I got into brewing. The first actual batch of beer I brewed was in 1994, when I was a college age kid living in a fraternity house in Boston. And the first batch of beer actually came out surprisingly drinkable.
Wow.
Not too bad.
Not bad at all.
The second batch of beer, for a bunch of people going to a technical university with a bunch of people who understand microbiology, boy, did we screw that thing up.
Yeah, I was lucky, man. My first batch of beer came out really well. It was basically a pale ale kit, a lot like Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. Came from a place up in Seattle called Pike Brewing, which is gone now. But at that point, it was the oldest homebrew shop in the U.S. It had been like in operation since the 30s, and it turned out really, really nicely. And I still remember the first time I opened a bottle and it went. And I thought that I'd done magic,
Yeah.
It was just so amazing, and it tasted good. And I'm afraid a monster was born, and I hope my wife doesn't regret giving me that brewing kit.
Yeah. My wife is like, anything that keeps you out of trouble and out of my hair, I'm fine.
Yeah, man. As long as I don't interfere with her gardening time, it's cool.
For her, it's like, as long as I'm not in her space when she's doing, because she has her own small business from home, and she uses Zoom to talk to the people she teaches and things like that. And she says, as long as you're not in the house when you're making beer, or if you're coming in and out, you're quiet, I really don't care. I mean, all right.
Cool, man. Well, at least you know where you stand.
Yeah, I stand like 6 feet outside the house. It's all good. It's what else is new in my life.
Well, see, and to that point, my wife and I actually have separate offices and separate buildings here on our house site.
Oh,
So,
wow.
I'm here in the main house, and we have a little mother-in-law suite in the back, and that's where she teaches out of. So yeah, it turns out I think one of the keys to a happy marriage is separate spaces.
Yes, absolutely. And sometimes other continents, which is what I found after multiple deployments to overseas.
Yeah,
I
that can
think
do it.
sometimes my wife would be happy if I deployed overseas.
So, oh man, oh, this is going to be a fun show. All right, so we are going to talk about things to experiment with beer. So, I am going to say I am going to be making a bourbon stout very very soon, and I
Mhm.
have friends who own Escarpment Laboratories here
Mhm.
in
Oh,
Ontario.
oh, what a great bunch of guys.
They're all, Richard and those guys are fantastic.
Yeah, yeah.
So I reached out to them and I said, "Hey, look, guys, this is what I'm looking at. What I'm looking at doing. I was wondering if I could take you up on your offer to get some yeast to experiment with." And they're like, "Sure. What do you need?" I said, "Well, I'd like to try your Irish ale yeast." And they're like, "Okay, that'll be good for a bourbon stout." And I'm like, "Okay, great." I said, "Well, what other strain do you want?" "What do you mean?" "Well, if you're going to do an experiment, take two." Like, okay. So I'm going to be doing like 10 gallons of bourbon stout with two different yeasts. But what else can you do for experiments other than just experimenting with hops and yeasts? I mean, what else can you really do?
Oh man, there's process. I mean, basically, it's a very personal thing. It depends on what you care about learning, you know? Um, it's easy. I mean, one of my first ones that I did was a decoction experiment, where I did a batch of beer. Drew's shaking his head. I did one batch decocted, one batch non-decocted. I got a bunch of other people from all over the world to do that. We put together tasting panels and tried to decide if decoction made a difference that people preferred in a beer, right?
Okay.
It's not, does it make a difference, right? Because people seem to get too hung up on things that don't matter. Does decoction make a difference? Maybe, maybe so. But we're not sitting there just analyzing the beers and measuring them. We're drinking them, right?
Exactly.
So so the question then becomes, does decoction make a difference that makes people prefer the decocted beer more? So that was kind of the first study that we did. Uh, I think Drew has done something kind of similar.
Oh yeah, I've done a couple of decoction type experiments because I always want to be convinced that decoction's worth the effort.
Yeah.
Because
Really?
um,
It just seems
well,
so much more, it's so much more effort.
but I
Yeah.
mean that's the thing. I like to me, it's like I would like to. There's something morally pure about the idea that if you put more work into it, then there's a reason to do the more work.
Okay.
I'm not convinced about that. As Denny's fond of saying, homebrewing is one of the few hobbies out there where people are convinced the harder you work, the better things are.
Right.
And I think in very limited cases, there's a reason to do decoction. Like if you're using traditional under modified malts and all that sort of good stuff.
Yeah.
But if you're coming anywhere near like modern ingredients and modern processes, uh, unless you're trying to make the world's lightest pilsner that actually has some more character in it, I don't think decoction is going to make a damn bit of difference in what you do.
See, I'll admit it. I'm lazy,
Mhm.
and I go by the adage: work smarter, not harder.
Mhm.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, Drew and I, each call ourselves the laziest brewer in the world, and we would like argue about it, but that would take too much energy, and we're too lazy to do that. So,
You're
you know,
sleeping.
but but a lot of the experimentation that I have done through the years has been driven purely by laziness, right? I want to know, like Drew said, what works and if it's worth the effort. My motto is make the best beer possible with the least effort possible while having the most fun possible,
Okay.
And by
because
the way,
that's
also
what it's all.
and also very very importantly, that's also very personal, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So one of the places where I think a lot of people get in trouble with the idea of experimentation, like either the stuff like we publish, the stuff that other homebrewers publish, the stuff that Brewosophy publishes and whatnot, is that these are gospels of truth. They are the right way to brew. But the very important part that gets missed a lot of times is they may not be the right way to brew for you.
Yeah. Uh,
So if
Yeah.
you're the sort of person who is insane and loves to work hard, decoctions may make the brewing process more enjoyable for you. In which case, you have my blessing to go forth and
Right.
decoct every batch of beer you ever make.
Yeah, I mean that's the whole idea right there, is that everybody gets to decide for themselves what is worth it.
Right.
My own brewing philosophy over the years has really evolved. When I started, I was very much into the science behind it, and I needed to find out how everything worked, that kind of thing. These days, I kind of feel like I've absorbed the science and come out the other side. So, what really is my reason for brewing is because I enjoy the process more than anything else. Sure, it's great to have the beer and it's great to have a great beer that you make yourself. But for me, it's like the making of the beer is really, really what does it for me more than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, excuse me. I got back into brewing because I work at a craft brewery out here where I like 5 minutes from where I live here in Ottawa. And it inspired me to just dive in full tilt and not go the route with a lot of my friends were saying, oh, you got to learn how you do DME, LME, and then work your way up. And I'm like, why? I know, excuse me. I know the basic process right now for having worked in a brewery now for the last 2 years, milk, grain in mill, really hot water, stir it around for an hour, drain it, boil it, chill it, ferment it, and hope that God you don't blow anything up along the way. It's not rocket science. I'd say it's more or less an experiment in patience. And I admit there's a lot of times where my patience go out okay, I have colorful language, so if I say anything that offends you, please let me know.
I don't know. I don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
Not right.
All right. So my patience goes out the fucking window. And there's times where I've forgotten, okay, I gotta make sure I turn the pump off and I take off the recirculation. I'm like, oh, it's a wart fountain. Turn off the pump. So, I mean, shit happens. But I guess when you're looking at what are some really cool, easy experiments people can do when they're brewing. I mean, I know you're saying it, and then I totally agree with you when you say it's totally a personal thing. But if someone wants to try to start experimenting, what's an easy way to start other than just say ingredients?
Well,
Well,
the problem is the reason why people always get drawn to ingredients is I think that brewers, a lot of homebrewers get drawn into beer making from a culinary mindset.
True.
And so if you have a culinary mindset, then ingredients are a very natural way to start, and they're very compelling. So it's hard. It's not hard to understand why everybody obsesses over ingredients, because that's like the thing that you're most directly impactful with. But I think you can pick up a lot of that knowledge along the way just by brewing.
Okay.
yeah, and ingredients too. I mean, that's one that people have to be careful when they do it, because the normal homebrewer tendency is to throw 40 ingredients into a beer, right? And simple recipes can be really great, and there's a lot of people, Drew especially, says simplify your recipes as much as possible.
Yeah, this is
I'm
one of
not
our this is one
quite
of our
in that
disagreements.
mindset,
Okay. Is he calling you
but
simple?
it's only a minor disagreement where,
Yeah,
well,
we both get to the same place. We
yeah,
just take it from a different side.
yeah. I think we are approaching the same goal, but from different areas. Drew's idea is to start with the simplest recipe you can possibly come up with. My idea is to use as many ingredients in whatever quantity as it takes to achieve your goal, but know what each and every one of them is doing, and that there's a reason for it to be there.
Mhm.
Don't just like put in crystal 60 because every recipe you look at has crystal 60 in it. Know what it's going to do. So to that end, if you do want to experiment with ingredients, make sure, I mean, my way of doing it is to have like a recipe, I brew it, I see it, and it's not quite there. I pick one thing and only one thing to change at a time. Yes.
There is no mercy here with you guys. I love this. One's talking, the other one's putting the fingers to his head saying, shoot me now. This is what the hell?
Again, we act more like a married couple than a lot of married couples out there. Well, because
Yeah, right.
because
But
Denny's way of brewing that way, that
but when
iterative process, not me.
Okay. So you just
yeah,
rather
I
keep it
mean
as simple as
when I
possible?
when
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's
well, I mean Drew is like more of a one and done kind of guy.
yeah,
Oh.
yeah.
Where
But
well,
I have to move on to new
not
flavors.
like that.
No,
Yeah, whereas like my rye IPA recipe, I think I brewed 12 or 13 test batches of that before I got it. My American mild was like 8 or 9 test batches before I got it. And Drew isn't like that. It's like, if his beer turns out like shit, it's like, oh well.
no. If it turns out like oh shit, I'm like, well, good to know. Next beer.
There
I
you go.
won't do that. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I won't. And again, I'm the kind of guy who tends to brew the same recipes over and over. I will get a hankering for some beer, and I'll decide to brew it, and I'll pull out my recipe notebook to see what the recipe looks like, and find out that I have brewed that beer almost exactly a year before,
Mhm.
because at certain times of the year I get the craving for certain beers, whereas Drew is like always on to the next new thing. Those
Denny is a
young
man
kids,
of
man.
well, Denny is more of a man of tradition and respect and cycles. Respect the knowledge of the seasons and make sure you honor your fathers.
I think he's calling you old now,
Yeah,
Denny.
that's okay, man. I deserve it.
So I can understand what you're saying about pulling out your recipe book and things like that, because I have an alt beer recipe that I live by, and it's
Hmm.
fantastic. And I think it was last month or the month before, I had Horst Dornbush on the show, and he was just like, okay, yeah, yeah. And I was telling him what I did, and I said, yeah, for some reason, I'm like, even though the recipe says it's supposed to be like 5.5%, I'm hitting like 6.5%. And he's like, what the
Me
hell
too.
are you doing? And I'm like, I don't know, I'm pressure fermenting it. You're what? Oh, well, yeah, I can turn the beer around in like 3 days. He says, no, that's impossible. And I'm telling you, I can turn it around in 3 days. And he said, well, let me see your recipe. And he says, oh, okay, get rid of the two row and just make it all Munich. I'm like, all right. So now I have to go and try that now because I haven't had a chance to. So
I have an alt beer was the first beer I ever won an award for, and it was like the first all grain batch that I ever brewed. Uh, and back then, nobody was brewing alt, so it was easy to brew alt and enter contests and win because it was like there were like maybe 2 of them there.
yeah.
Well,
But
Denny's old
you
enough that alt beer was actually called new back then.
Ooh. Is that,
oh, very good.
is that kind of like saying when
But
he knew a
I have
centurion
what
as
I
a
call
person, not a tank?
Exactly.
there's my son. I have what I call my Americanized alt beer that uses 9 pounds of dark Munich and like Munich 10 and 3 pounds of pills and Spalt hops, and it's not a lot like most German Munichs. It's kind of made with like or most German alts rather. It's kind of made with
Excuse me.
Zumerigen, in that I kind of like hop it up. But on the other hand, yeah, I'm like you, man. Mine comes out like to be like 6.4 to 6.6%. I don't care. I'm not. I mean, when I enter it in a competition, it does well because the judges don't know, and
Yeah.
it's the way I like. And when I was developing my American mild recipe, I found that it is way easier to make a flavorful beer with a lot of ingredients than with a few ingredients.
Okay. So what are some of the things you guys like to experiment with when you're brewing? Do you like, is it equipment? Is it ingredients?
Yeah.
Is it to see who can push the other person's button?
Oh no, we do that
No,
naturally for fun.
yeah, yeah. I mean, for me, I think a lot of it is process driven. I like to find out about what differences in process make in terms of the final beer.
Mhm.
Uh, Ingredients, sometimes, I mean, we're in the enviable position where we get sent a lot of different new ingredients to play with and try out. and we do that, but I still revert to my tried and true recipes with the ingredients I know and understand. In case for me, for ingredient experimentation, takes mainly the form of looking through the 40 pounds of hops in my hop freezer and go, okay, what am I going to dry hop with this time? Because otherwise I'll tend to make the same. You know, I make like a lot of IPAs because that's what my wife likes, and so I'll make like 10, 15 gallons of IPA, split it into 2 or 3 batches, and they'll be all the same except for the dry hops.
Yeah,
And
no
that's
IP.
about as
Yeah, no
that's about
IPAs
as
in this house.
Yeah.
really. Yeah.
I mean, they're okay, but I'm a sucker for a good British beer.
Well, we'll make a British IPA.
Yeah. See,
See, and then for me,
Drew, on the other hand, yeah.
Yeah, and for me, like I'm driven. I'm actually when I'm doing ingredients, I'm actually driven more by yeast than I am
Okay.
by hops or by malts. Although I've been having a lot of fun playing around with craft malts.
Yeah.
Those turn out to actually have some really nice impacts, and they do actually change part of your process as well.
Really?
Yeah, they do. Well, because the thing to think about is all the big malt that you get, right? Like all the like the RAR, the Great Western, like whoever your big maltsters are that you'll be able to drag out from BSG or Country Malt or whoever. Those malts have all been so carefully formulated to be easy to use in a big brew house. And like all your pale or pills malt has for a large portion of it, not all of it, but a large portion has been essentially designed to have as much enzyme as possible and as little flavor as possible. And so, and also lower protein counts.
Right.
Now, one of the things that I've noticed in playing around with these craft maltsters is, the controls aren't quite the same, right? It's like going from, say, Budweiser or Molson to to like your local craft brewery, and you'll see like there's a difference in control that happens there. So with these craft malts, what I'm finding is that one, there's more variability, two, there's more flavor, and the one that's actually interesting that you do kind of have to compensate for sometimes is there's usually more protein, which leads to some different flavors and some different haze characteristics. And so that's one place in ingredients I've been playing around with. Obviously, process wise, I think the big change right now for a lot of homebrewers has been what can you do with fermentation in terms of using all these quake strains, all these crazy little bugs that can operate at supposedly at 95 plus degrees and produce a clean beer.
In 36 hours.
Yeah, in
Yeah.
2.3 femtoseconds. Not that I actually agree that they are necessarily that clean when they're running that hot. But I've been playing around with those just to see and understand that world of farmhouse, right? Because that's one of my big things is the farmhouse beers. So I find actually my experimentation in terms of ingredients is driven more by microbiology, even though I'm not a big sour guy. So I don't tend to do a ton of mixed cultures beers. But more by yeast, and then also some of the process changes, like playing around with fermentation, like trying to see, okay, for instance, with the quake strains, everybody talks about running those super hot, right? And everybody's jonesed about it because, hey, this means I don't have to worry so much about my temperature control.
No, you do.
What I've been playing around with is trying to see, okay, if I do have temperature control, because I got a couple of glycol jacketed fermenters hanging out in my garage, I don't have to worry about temperatures until I'm in the middle of summer here in LA, and it hits 115 in there. I forget what that is in Celsius. Sorry.
It's yeah, it's like 30 or some odd stupid.
Yeah, it's called damn hot.
Yeah.
And even though so I have that, and so I'm not necessarily obsessed with the idea of like, can I push this thing to 95 degrees? I find a lot of homebrewers are trying to like obsessed about like how many IBUs can I get, how big my gravity is, how hot can I ferment this, how fast can I ferment this, how short is my lag time? I don't care about that. What I care about is the end product. And so I've been playing around a lot with the quakes is actually saying how low I can go in terms of the temperature and still get either some of the quake characteristics that people care about. Like, I mean, a lot of people out there say take like the Voss strains that are out there. Those produce that sour orange characteristic. And if you're making an IPA or a hazy IPA, for instance, you want that sour orange character. It actually makes sense in the beer. But if you push the yeast lower and slower, do you avoid that sour orange character? Can you make something that is not a super orangey, super hoppy type beer with that strain, and not have it read as a Quake beer. And
Okay.
I just found out the other day, or not the other day, but a couple of weeks ago now, that one of our bigger breweries to the east of us here in LA, a place called Hangar 24, they brought in a former brewer for Brewdog, like the guy who headed up a lot of their international operations, and he's actually switched all of their beers, which includes their IPAs, their porter. They have an orange wheat that they do, and a
Okay.
couple of other beers. He switched all of those over to doing fermentation.
Okay. You froze for a sec, so we lost you there on that last part.
He switched him over to doing what?
He's frozen.
Uh-oh.
I shouldn't be.
You are now. Oh, there you go. So what did he switch them all over to? A Kvike?
Yeah, to Voss.
Oh, wow.
So all of his beers now are done with Voss Kvike, including his porter. And it was actually really interesting to me because I tasted it and I didn't get that sour orange character out of it.
Wow.
And so and part of that's his process control. So a lot of what I'm playing around with in terms of process is that. Other places where Denny and I have both been playing around with process, because we are both also hop heads. We've been playing around with dry hopping, right? You know,
Yeah.
like everybody's obsessed with how much hop character can you drive into things, and so we've both been playing with shorter, cooler dry hopping.
Mhm.
So like doing Denny, what you've been running at 38.
Yeah, any place from 35 to 38. Basically, I crash the beer for a while, I dump all the trub, and then throw in my dry hops for 48 hours between 35 and 38 degrees. And I don't use the tremendous amounts that a lot of people are too, because my screwing around has kind of verified, at least for my taste buds, what Tom Shellhammer found, which is more than 8 grams per liter of hops, is going to be counterproductive. It can actually get more vegetal than fruity or something like that. So I mean that dry hops, I should say, not hops in general. So I've been generally keeping my dry hop low. I mean in the maybe like max out at 5 ounces for a 5-gallon batch, which is still an insanely large amount. But I'm seeing people like put in a pound of hops. I'm seeing people do a lot of hopping when they pitch the yeast. And I don't care for that at all. I do it short and cold. The short cold method eliminates the extraction of a lot of polyphenols that add harshness to the beer. The short time actually helps to retain more oils in the beer, because testing has shown that after 48 to 72 hours, you've gotten about all the oils out of the hops that you're going to get. And at that point, they actually start reabsorbing the oils, and you get a lot more of the vegetal character from the hops.
Right.
And so that's what we've been playing around with. Me especially, I've been really working on subtle tweaks to that technique to find what's going to work best for me, and especially because that technique is best suited to hops that are high in linalool and geraniol. What I'm trying to learn about also is how your dry hop techniques relates to the exact variety of hop that you have and the composition of its oils.
Yeah, if you haven't been listening to the podcast recently, it's become very apparent that all the stuff we know about hops is going to get really screwy really quick as people try and assign numerical approaches to what it is that they exactly want to dial
We
in.
were just
Yeah.
before
So-
this, we were talking to a couple of guys at Grainfather, because they have implemented the MIBU calculation for deciding how many IBUs are in a batch of beer, and it really takes into account a lot of things in terms of late hopping and stuff like that. And they have even now started reaching the point where they're beginning to learn how to account for the polyphenols extracted during dry hopping that give you the impression of bitterness, even if you don't get any IBUs.
Okay.
It's calculus, y'all.
Okay. Army guy. Math and me do not go hand in hand.
Oh, come on.
I I blow things up in place. That's it.
Yeah, man. Hey, didn't you watch Stripes, man? They had to use
Oh,
math to calculate the
no,
mortar.
Denny, obviously he's not an artillery guy.
No, let's see. I did 7 years in the infantry and got to be a paratrooper for 7 years.
Ooh, nice.
So I fell on my head a lot, which
Yeah.
explains a lot. Then I moved over to military intelligence. Yes, it's an oxymoron.
Jumbo shrimp, military intelligence.
That's it. It is an oxymoron. But I understand what you guys are saying about the hops and experimenting with modified and unmodified grains and things like that. Part of my thing is I've been experimenting mainly with pressure fermentation. Like, how far can I push it before it has an adverse effect, or how much pressure do I really need to have? How much is the max? How much is the lowest? And what I'm finding is that if you go above, say, like 12, it gets a really weird kind of gassy, funky flavor. And if you have it too low, you get a lot of nasty esters because the CO2 is not there to suppress it all. But I will say that with the pressure fermentation is that your yeasts, it really doesn't matter what yeast you use. You can use a lager yeast, you can use ale yeasts, even though I get told, why are you doing that with an ale yeast? It's meant to do it with lager yeast. It's meant to do lagers at warmer temperatures and suppress. I'm like, well, if you could do it with one, why not do it with the other? It's tomatoes, tomato. I mean,
Well, and see, man, that is a really good way to approach it, because people are telling you can't do it, and so you want to find out if you can and how.
yeah.
I When we were in Australia a couple of years ago, Chris White was down there at the same conference, and he did a presentation on pressure fermentation there. And then I spent some time talking to him about it afterwards. And what really became apparent to me was it can be a very finicky process.
Yeah.
And
Between
very strain dependent.
yeah, yeast strain and pressure just vary, and the results can be real variable also. I mean, this yeast strain needs to run at this pressure and you get these results. And so I decided at that point that it was too finicky for me. I'm not in a hurry to crank out a batch of beer. So I decided that, okay, I've learned what I need to learn about it, and that is not one of those things that I want to get into personally. A lot of people are doing it, and a lot of people are doing it just for the learning experience. Being old, I guess I'm a bit set in my ways. Drew might be able to verify that.
I have no comment.
I mean,
I plead the fifth.
I know what I like, and I know what I'm interested in. If I would have seen that pressure fermentation had something to offer me, I would have started playing with it. But after talking to Chris and seeing his presentation, I decided, like, this is just not one of those things for me. And it's homebrewing. It's a damn hobby.
Yeah.
Do what you want to do and what makes sense and what makes it fun for you. The whole thing is about fun. If you're not having fun, then you're doing it wrong.
I have a blast every time I'm brewing, but my problem is that my beer is usually gone within a week because family out to the east of me are taking it in like 5-gallon shots. So as soon as they get one,
you got that problem.
yeah, I get. So what do you have on? What do you have on tap? Well, I've got 5 gallons. Okay, we'll take it. Okay, well, I guess I should have made 10.
You need to brew bigger batches.
See, I tried to convince my wife to let me buy a 20-gallon system and to put like a 220-volt outlet in the garage, and I got politely told, "Fuck no."
Let's see, that's just the compromise aspect of marriage.
Yeah, happy wife, happy life. Yeah, I totally been married for like 22 years now. Yeah, I totally get that. totally get that.
Yeah, and I mean, like for me, I've played around a little bit with pressure fermentation, but I'm kind of in the same boat as Denny. I would the one place I've been curious about trying to do is one of the things I wrote about a long time ago is about how to turn a beer around, normal beer without pressure fermentation or anything else, in like grain to glass in like 5 to 7 days, right? And
Wow.
focusing on that. But one of the other places where now that you mentioned doing ales with it, I have a friend of mine who is absolutely pressure fermentation obsessed to the
Yep.
point where my club's been doing these weekly happy hours, and we bring on these brewers and we talk to them while we're drinking their beer, and it's a fun way to spend a Friday on lockdown. And it got to the point where he's so fermentation obsessed or pressure fermentation obsessed that I had to tell him he wasn't allowed to ask any pressure fermentation questions.
Oh,
But
wow.
but because he would ask every brewer, so what do you think about pressure fermentation? Are you doing any pressure
No,
fermentation in your brew?
no.
Um, yeah, most commercial brewers like, huh? No.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
They don't have the means to do it.
Yeah, I
no.
mean, and they if they need to turn around a batch quickly, they have other ways of doing it, like Drew was saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Um,
but I will say the one place that he was starting to play with that I'm actually curious to see what results he gets is doing pressure fermentation with mead and
Ooh.
trying to turn mead around faster, because I don't really see a lot of advantage in trying to turn around say a lager any faster
Yeah.
or even an ale any faster. But if you could turn around a mead faster, I would be curious.
Yeah, yeah. So the reason why I do pressure fermentation, one, is because my family drinks it all on me. Um,
I think you need a new family.
I need or start charging them for it.
yeah,
Two, is I like having a variety on hand. So in case I want to share with other people, I can say, "Hey, this is what I have. Let me know, and I'll give you a couple bottles." And three is just having it ready for homebrew competitions.
Mhm,
So just say, "Oh, I have this. Bottles gone, done."
mhm.
And
No, and that's fine. I mean, uh, but I do think that you need to start charging your family beer store prices.
oh, see,
really.
wow. I mean, I had a one family member say, "Look, we want to pay you. What is all your ingredients, your time, and everything else?" I'm like, "All right." I worked it all out. I wasn't trying to gouge anybody, and I said, "All right, for $70, that's all your bottles, ingredients, uh, my time. It's all good." Next thing you know, electronic money transfer, $150. I'm like, yeah, it's the.
Oh no.
I'm like, they're like,
Wait,
oh,
Now
don't.
you're committed.
Yeah. And they were like, don't read the message. It's like, okay, the $70 is for you. The rest is a tip for your helper. My helper is my dog.
So what did he buy with his money?
More beer for me.
Good boy.
That was
Yep.
nice of him. Yeah, that's a
Oh
good
yeah.
dog.
Earl's awesome. Then again, he's 120 pounds. Who's going to argue with him?
So I would say that if people want to get into experimenting, what they need to do is find out what they're curious about, right?
Yep.
What will make their lives better by knowing. And then they need to come up. I mean, we outline all this in Experimental Homebrew, and people look at that book and they think it's just all about weird recipes. That was
That's my
purely part.
contribution.
Yeah,
Hey
yeah.
man, weird's good.
My part of it was like more of the scientific side of experimental, how you go about doing the experiments and evaluating them. So it's like you want to try different ingredients, then you have to like do a split batch and do two boils. If you want to try different yeasts or dry hops, then it's easy to do a single batch and split that up and do a couple different yeasts in it. uh, but the main thing to do is go through the whole process, come up with a hypothesis so that you know what it is that you're going to be trying to find. And then the really important part is to do a blind triangle tasting. Uh, Confirmation bias is something that we all suffer from, no matter what it is, right?
Mhm.
One of my favorite experiments when they gave kids identical hamburgers, one in a plain brown bag, one in a McDonald's bag, and of course, all the kids preferred the hamburger in the McDonald's bag, although they were exactly the
Exactly the
same.
same. Yeah.
Adults are just like that with beer too.
Only
It's
actually adults are worse because adults think they know better.
Yeah, I mean, and it's like we were
Adults are
talking about
idiots.
with it's like we were talking about with decoction earlier, right? People say decoction makes a better beer. How much of that is because they did so much work that they want to believe that it makes a better beer? And again, it's a personal thing. You get to assess it for yourself. When you're doing your own blind triangle testing, you don't need to really worry about what anybody else thinks, right? You're making this beer for you. You just want to know what you prefer, and that's all that matters. But you really want to not be influenced by things that you know about. So it's like, have somebody pour you 2 glasses of one of the beers, one of the other, switch them around, and you pick out which one you prefer. And that's all that matters. You're not trying to prove this to anybody else. You're trying to make beer that you like the best it can be.
Awesome. So I'm going to ask you guys this. So for the listeners out there, if you guys want to give them a challenge for something to experiment with, what would you want to say? Go and try this.
I would say get a hold of some really good craft malt. There are hundreds of craft maltsters across North America these days. So go get some craft malt and then use the same big commercial malt that you normally use and make the same beer but with 2 different kinds of malt and learn about the difference that a good craft malt can make in the flavor of your beer.
Okay.
Denny's trying to push, make malt great again.
Well, that's yeah. It's one thing. I mean, hops have been getting all the love. Hops are sexy, and now there's a whole bunch of new cool things being done with malt that people probably haven't experimented with or experienced yet. So if I was going to encourage somebody to go out and do an experiment, I would say start with that because that's something
Okay.
that probably you haven't played with yet.
Yeah, we've spent the past 2 decades in craft brewing stripping malt out of our beers on purpose. It's time to put a little bit back in.
Yeah.
I've
Um,
been, I've been struggling trying to strip the hops out of my freaking freezer. I've been given so many.
Yeah, boy, I know that.
yeah, it's homebrew problems. And for me, what I would suggest people do, just because this is my own personal bugaboo, and it's something I've talked about for years. So I'm a saison guy, right? Huge surprise. The beer I make more often than anything else is saison. And I have for years have told people, go and do your DuPont strains. So your YE's 3724s, your WLP 565s, and do those with open fermentation. Because the big thing that people complain about with those strains is, oh my god, you get into the fermenter, it starts fermenting like gangbusters, and then it gets to like 10:30 and stops, and you got to wait 2-3 weeks before it tries to finish out. If you do it open fermentation, I maintain you don't see the same problem. And so when we've done that experiment in the past, all but one of our testers, or one of the people who's done that experiment, saw no fermentation stall with the open fermentation as opposed to the closed fermentation. The only
Okay.
one who didn't see the stall was Marshall Schott of Brewlosophy, and but he also at the same time kept pulling his airlock to check the gravity. Um, but I would
Yeah.
and by the way, I would also say in general, if I could promote to people one technique that they needed to try more, um, and one process change to try more to see what sort of difference it makes in their beers, I would suggest more people try doing open fermentation. There's a
Really?
good number of strains out there, whether like the
Yep.
classic Pilsen strain,
Okay.
a lot of the British strains, even a lot of these Belgian strains that do wonders under open fermentation conditions.
See, the only one I know of for yeast that you could do open fermentation is what, Ringwood? That's not one I really know of.
Well, yeah, no,
Yeah.
the classic Pilsner or Kel yeast was trained up essentially on open fermentation. They were doing open fermentation for years there. Anchor's strains, so like American Liberty 2, or sorry, American Ale 2, and the California Common strains, those are
Okay.
open fermentation favorite.
Wow.
Almost every British strain that you can think of at some point in time when it at least started was probably conditioned for open fermentation. So, yeah,
Okay.
it's
So
very
so
true.
I would love to do that, but again, kids, I mean, they're
Mhm.
a lot bigger, but then again, I'm dealing with teenagers who are like just don't pay attention to what they're doing. And
Mhm.
I have 3 dogs. So the last thing I need is to have a dog getting drunk on wort. or on beer that's in a bucket somewhere?
My solution to that is I have Chihuahuas. They can't get into the buckets.
Oh wait, so I have a Chihuahua. Trust me, she is squirrelier than all get out and finds any way to get into something. I have a Chihuahua pug mix, and she's just as loopy as the Chihuahua. And then there's Earl, the big guy, and he just goes where he wants to go. So yeah, whatever.
Yep. No, but trust me, open fermentation sounds scary to people, but it's really not.
Okay.
Like if you're in a bucket, for instance, just you'd said earlier that you put saran wrap over the top of your first bucket. You could do something like that, or just put foil over the thing. Yeah, you do want it in a place where you're not going to get a big draft or possibly a big galumping by and knocking.
And then the other important aspect of that is once the krausen falls, you want to seal your fermenter up.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, open fermentation technique is not a technique for somebody who's lazy, or I should say, lazy enough that what you want to do is walk away from the beer for 2 weeks and then come back to it.
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
It does take some attention. So
not much.
No, but if you're the kind of person who likes to babysit your beer, then that's a good thing for you to try. And again, this would be a good time to like split a batch into 2 fermenters.
Yeah.
Ferment one open, ferment one your normal way, and then compare and see what you think.
That's a good idea. Have you guys done any experiments with temperature control?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to some degree, although, I have to admit that I decided personally a long time ago that I like starting beer is pretty cool, probably more so than most people. Any place from 55 to 63 degrees Fahrenheit is where I start most things.
Oh, okay.
So, that's, again, I've learned that for my tastes, that makes the beer that I like best.
Okay. How about you, Drew?
Yeah, and again, playing with my saison theme, I've done experimentation with temperature control in different ways on the saison yeast. So, because everybody talks again with the DuPont strain, crank that sucker up, pitch it and let it go all the way up to 95 degrees. It's the only way it's going to ferment out. And one experiment I did when I did a massive yeast strain experiment back in, God, that was like 2010. Good Lord.
It was a while ago, yeah.
Yeah. I did like 18 batches of wort from a professional brewery and all sorts of different strains in them. And then 2 I pitched with the DuPont strain, so the 565 from White Labs. And 1 I held at ambient. And I started it the way I always do, which is cool, and then let it come up, but control that rise. Because my preferred method is to go in at about like 62 to 64 for the first 2 to 3 days, and then let it run up, just to control the formation of esters and phenols at that early stage. And then I put the other one, I put a brew belt on, the heating belts.
Yep.
And I ramped that sucker straight up out of the chiller up to about 85 degrees Fahrenheit and pitched it straight away and let it run. And which is what a lot of people advocate, right? A lot of people are advocating like, oh, pitch the wort at like, pitch the yeast in when it's like 75 degrees and then just let it go, right? So you could tell a difference. You could really, really tell a difference. And I will tell you right now, if you liked drinking the beer that was around the brew belt, I worry about you, bud.
See, I don't have that desire. See, I mean, I've seen too many people say crank it up to 85 degrees when you're doing with Kvikes and things like that. I'm like, well, you're putting it to the point where you're gonna stress it beyond belief. I don't think Kvike was meant to really get that high. I mean, I understand between 75 and 80 is maybe the max limit, and that way you avoid any of the esters and the phenols, whatever, all the bad stuff that comes out when you're stressed. So and that's me. I mean, like you said, it's all, I guess, all personal preference to what you're looking for. I mean, I like British beers. I like German beers. Kind of like having very clean and very easy drinking.
I mean, that's the beauty of home brewing. We're brewing for our own tastes. One of the many reasons that I would never be a commercial brewer is that you're brewing what other people want to drink, not what you want to drink. You're satisfying the customers who will then give you money, which will then satisfy the board of directors, but it may not satisfy your soul, you know?
Yeah.
And, you know, when I brew, it's firmly a hobby. I'm brewing for me, I'm brewing for my wife. And if my friends happen to like what I make, that's great. It's an honor for me that they'll deign to drink my beer. But, you know, I don't have to worry about what other people are going to like. I'm doing it for me.
Yeah, and then of course you got Dan's problem where it doesn't matter what he brews, his family just wants to drink it anyway.
Yeah,
pretty much.
It's quantity. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've done like almost 20 gallons worth of alt beer that I've only seen 5 gallons out of it. Then there was like 15 gallons of Pilsner, lemon drop Pilsner I did, and then a few things of porter. I didn't see any of the cerveza I made. So
what kind of system did you brew on, Dan?
So I have a Gen 3 RoboBrew, and which has been fantastic. And I've been kicking the ever living shit out of this thing, and it's still going. But then I also use 2 of the Firmzillas to ferment with. And that way, because they're plastic, I just get the pressure kits for them, turn them done. But I am waiting for my very first stainless steel fermenter to come. I'm waiting.
Right.
I'm getting a Flex Plus sent to me.
Cool.
So I'm waiting to try that bad boy out.
We're Grainfather guys. I've been using the G70, which is the 15-gallon unit.
That big bugger.
And
yeah.
then we each have three of the Grainfather jacketed conicals and a glycol chiller to do them with. I love the G70. I mean, I can crank out 15 gallons of beer in 4 hours. And you know, for somebody, you know, for somebody who's like in your situation, you know, that kind of thing is great because you can brew a lot and make big batches every time. You just got to figure out a way to ferment them. For me, I love the design of the G70, which is why I love to brew on it. But one of the issues is that it almost makes too much beer for just me here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one thing I do miss about pre-pandemic times is, you were joking about you got to see like 5 gallons out of your 15 gallons. When during pre-pandemic times and we'd have beer festivals and whatnot, it was not uncommon for me to brew a batch of beer and maybe get like, say a 6-pack out of it and then take the rest over to a festival.
Yep.
And that was perfectly fine with me because I'm like Denny, I'm less interested about, necessarily having a lot of beer on hand as opposed to having a chance to play around and make new beers.
Yeah. And that's what I like to do. I like to try something. I'll find a recipe. I'm like, okay, I see what they're doing. I'm going to change it completely and use totally different stuff. I mean, I may use the same quantities of certain things, but other than that, no, I'm changing it completely. See what it does.
You know, man, one of the things that really drives me crazy is when somebody says like, I brewed your rye IPA recipe, but I had to make a few changes based on what I had on hand. Like I didn't have any rye malt, so I left that out. And I didn't have any Columbus hops, so I used Citra instead, and it's like, fuck, you didn't brew my recipe.
You made yours.
Yeah. By the way, this is the beer equivalent of all those recipe bloggers where you see like, hey, I made this recipe by substitute this, and that, and then my husband hated it.
Yeah, right.
I wonder why.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Boys, thank you very much for doing this. I greatly appreciate it. We have come to the end of our hour together, and I can honestly say I haven't laughed this hard in a long time. Thank you.
That's good.
I'm not sure we actually talked about the topic you wanted us to talk about, but
who gives a fuck?
Yeah. It's homebrew-tainment.
Exactly. Boys, thank you very much. Guys, you got to check them out. Experiment Brewing. They have their website. They have Instagram. There's Facebook, YouTube. Check them out completely. It is honestly one of the coolest things you will do. And be like SpongeBob, absorb, enjoy.
And go buy our books.
And buy their books. Definitely buy their books.
There's three of them. There's Experimental Brewing, there's Homebrew All-Stars, and Simple Homebrewing.
There you go. Guys, we've had Denny Conn and Drew Beechum on the show, two of the most beer famous guys I could possibly get on the show. And boys, thank you very much for doing this. And we'll do it again sometime down the road.
Thanks for asking us, Dan.
So I'd like to say thank you to Drew and Denny for being on the show this week. I haven't laughed this hard in a very long time while talking to people who I felt like were friends for a long time. Go check them out on Instagram, check them out on Facebook, on their website. I think they even have Twitter, and they also have a bunch of books that you need to check out. So listen to the show, and they help mention their books. Guys, thanks a lot for taking the time to talk to a relatively new homebrewer. It is really appreciated. And once again, folks, thanks for tuning in for a beer or two along the way, and one more time around the sun. See you on the other side.